Hey everyone, Tom from CarbonTrail again. Today we'll share our knowledge and clarify some key concepts, debunk common myths, and alert you to some frequent gotchas that could trip you up in this space. You see, we've been working with businesses large and small for a while now, and a few common things get discussed when we're starting folks on this journey. We'll also be discussing these throughout this video series, so it's good to get a few of these out of the way early. So let's get started. First, let's tackle some key concepts. Carbon accounting. This is the practice of measuring greenhouse gas emissions associated with your business activities. You can think of this as building on the concepts of financial accounting, working within a budget, setting goals, and making sure you're transparent. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol and ISO 1464. These global standards define the requirements for quantifying and managing greenhouse gas emissions. We'll talk about these in a little bit more detail in another video. Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Understanding the difference between direct emissions from your operations, indirect emissions from purchased energy, and all other indirect emissions in your value chain is crucial. Again, we'll dive a bit deeper on these later. Offsets. You've probably heard of offsets or carbon credits. These are tools that can be used to offset one's organization's emissions by purchasing credits from projects that aim to capture or avoid emissions. Now, this topic is massive. We'll do a full video on this later in the series. Spend-based and activity-based measurements. Spend-based measurements take your financial activity and multiply that spending with something called an emissions factor, which says for every dollar spent in a given category, here is an estimate of those emissions. These are quick to get started with and are great when other data doesn't exist but can be inaccurate. Activity-based measurements are based on actual usage, for example, kilowatt hours of electricity use or the litres of fuel used in a company vehicle. These again are multiplied by an emissions factor, but they're generally considered the gold standard for accuracy in a carbon footprint. CarbonTrail uses both spend-based and activity-based measurements to get our users the highest accuracy possible whilst providing the greatest depth of measurement. Science-based targets and carbon budgets. Setting targets based on global thresholds helps ensure your business's efforts align with broader climate goals. You might even find that your customers ask you to set or report on specific emissions targets. One way to approach managing this is through a carbon budget and reviewing your emissions against this on a regular basis. Cool, that's the common concepts out of the way. Let's debunk some myths. Just measuring my emissions makes me net zero. Some businesses we've worked for have asked, well, I've measured using CarbonTrail or another tool. Does that mean I'm net zero now? The simple answer is no. We'll talk about what net zero and net positive means in another video, as it's a pretty big topic. All carbon credits are equal. The effectiveness and legitimacy of carbon credits can vary significantly, so it is essential to choose wisely to ensure that you actually have some real impact. For example, some carbon credits are generated from the planting of pine trees, which are known to be more susceptible to fire and destroy local ecosystems, versus native trees, which don't have as many of those issues. Peeking behind the curtain is incredibly important in the world of carbon credits and offsets. Reducing carbon is always costly. Well, in fact, many businesses find that the initiatives that we suggest to reduce carbon also reduce their costs by increasing efficiency. And let's go into a couple of gotchas. So, the complexity of Scope 3 calculation. These emissions are often the largest part of your footprint and can require careful calculation and verification. Now, the reason that we started CarbonTrail was to make this a lot easier, so stay tuned. But yeah, Scope 3 can be a bit of a sticking point for some businesses, so watch out for that one. Inaccurate data and assumptions. Using faulty data can lead to misguided strategies and non-compliance with some regulations. This can happen sometimes when you use spend-based emissions to calculate your entire footprint. Regulatory changes and compliance risks. The regulations and guidance in this area are evolving constantly. Now, we've seen folks trip up by trying to manage this themselves. Using a tool like CarbonTrail can help avoid this because we build the best practices into the tool from day one. Okay, so we've covered a bit of ground here, thrown out a few new concepts. Take a moment to let that all sink in. For more detailed explanations and updates, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications in this series. Thank you for watching and see you next time.